Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudirayet Nashta Prayeshva Bhadrishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevayam Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Yam Pravrajanta Manopetam Apeta Krityam Dvaipayana Virahakatara Juhava Putreti Tan Mayatayo Taravo Binedus Tam Sarva Bhuta Hridayam Munimanatosmi. So again, thank you very much for attending these classes. Wherever you are, please feel free to ask any questions. Today I will continue with our series of lectures where I am trying to give an overview of the topics of Srimad-Bhagavatam with more or less general understanding why these topics are there. I'm not going very deeply into the topics themselves, but I'm trying to show how the whole design of Srimad-Bhagavatam works and what it is supposed to bring about within our heart, which is most important because even though it is an automatic action of the transcendental vibration of Srimad-Bhagavatam that it will purify the heart, Nashta Prayeshva Bhadrishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. It acts without our knowledge. Still, nevertheless, if I understand how it acts and we will pay specific attention to certain topics of Srimad-Bhagavatam, knowing what they're supposed to do within our hearts, it will enhance our hearing of Srimad-Bhagavatam or studying of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and ultimately will bring us closer to understanding the real message of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Otherwise, we can be bewildered by the varieties of topics. We can be distracted by different topics, not understanding how these different topics ultimately are describing one topic. Because, as we already mentioned, the book has to have only one topic, not many topics. If the book has many topics, it's a bad book, because it's only bewildering the reader. So the topic, the message should be one, and we know that this one single message of Srimad-Bhagavatam is to help us to understand Krishna, to help us understand the ultimate reality, shelter, the background of the whole creation, background and the support of the whole creation, the ground and support of creation. So I will read one verse from the 26th chapter of the 3rd canto to introduce my talk today, which probably will again only speak one canto, even though I wanted to go quickly, but you can actually tell me what you want. If you want very quick overview of the whole design of Srimad-Bhagavatam, that can be done within a few minutes or within one session, going from canto to canto and explaining the logical connection between the cantos and how they work ultimately to reveal Krishna, which is the subject matter, specific subject matter of the 10th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, or we can go in a little slow pace and take 1, 2, maybe 3 cantos at once and explain in more detail how it works, how it brings us closer to understanding of the main topic of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Anyway, I will read the verse. This is the 5th verse from the 26th chapter of 3rd canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam to introduce this topic. It's a very important and beautiful verse with very substantial and long purport by Srila Prabhupada. So please listen very attentively. Guṇair vicitrāḥ sṛjatīṁ sa-rūpāḥ prakṛtim prajāḥ vilokya mumuhe sadyaḥ sa-rūpāḥ jñāna-gūhayā. This verse is explaining how the consciousness of a living entity, prajāḥ, living entities, are being bewildered by the contact with material nature. How immediately, by contact with material nature, the consciousness of pure knowledge of the living entities are being covered by jñāna-gūhayā. The consciousness is guṇair, is covered or perverted. So, translation by Srila Prabhupada, divided into varieties by her threefold modes, the material nature creates the forms of the living entities. And the living entities, seeing this, are illusioned by the knowledge-covering feature of the illusory energy. Purport. Material energy has the power to cover knowledge, jñāna-gūhayā. But this covering cannot be applied to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is applicable only to the prajāḥ, or those who are born with material bodies, the conditioned souls. The different kinds of living entities vary according to the modes of material nature as explained in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures. In Bhagavad Gita, it is very nicely explained that although the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance are born of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is not subject to them. In other words, the energy emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot act on him. It acts on the conditioned souls who are covered by the material energy. The Lord is the father of all living entities because he impregnates material energy with the conditioned souls. Therefore, the conditioned souls get bodies created by the material energy, whereas the father of the living entities is aloof from the three modes. It is stated in the previous verse that the material energy was accepted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order that he might exhibit pastimes for the living entities who wanted to enjoy and lord it over the material energy. This world was created through the material energy of the Lord for the so-called enjoyment of such living entities. Why this material world was created for the sufferings of the conditioned souls is a very intricate question. There is a hint in the previous verse in the word vilokya, which means for the pastimes of the Lord. The Lord wants to rectify the enjoying temperament of the conditioned souls. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that no one is the enjoyer but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This material energy is created, therefore, for anyone who pretends to enjoy. So it's for pretenders. This world is for us who are trying to fake the enjoyment in this material world. An example can be cited here that there is no necessity for the government's creation of a separate police department, but because it is a fact that some of the citizens will not accept the state laws. A department to deal with criminals is necessary. There is no necessity, but at the same time, there is a necessity. Similarly, there was no necessity to create this material world for the sufferings of the conditioned soul, but at the same time, there are certain living entities known as Nityabada who are eternally conditioned. We say that they have been conditioned from the time immemorial because no one can trace out when the living entity, the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, became rebellious against the supremacy of the Lord. It is a fact that there are two classes of men: those who are obedient to the laws of the Supreme Lord and those who are atheists or agnostics, who do not accept the existence of God and who want to create their own laws. They want to establish that everyone can create his own laws or his own religious path without tracing out the beginning of the existence of these two classes. We can take it for granted that some of the living entities revolted against the laws of the Lord. Such entities are called conditioned souls, for they are conditioned by the three modes of material nature. Therefore, the words guṇair vicitrāḥ is useful there. Guṇair vicitrāḥ means the variety of the material creation of the gunas. In this material world, there are 8,400,000 species of life. As spirit souls, they are all transcendental to this material world. Why then do they exhibit themselves in different stages of life? The answer is given here. They are under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because they are created by the material energy, their bodies are made of material elements. They were created. Covered by the material body, the spiritual entity is lost, and therefore the word mumuhe is used here, indicating that they have forgotten their spiritual identity. This forgetfulness of spiritual identity is present in the jivas or souls who are conditioned, being subject to be covered by the energy of material nature. Jñāna-gūhayā is another word used here. Guha means covering. Because the knowledge of the minute conditioned souls is covered, they are exhibited in so many species of life. It is said in Srimad-Bhagavatam 7th chapter, 1st canto, the living entity are illusioned by the material energy. Yayo samahito jiva. In the Vedas, it is also stated that the eternal living entities are covered by the different modes and that they are called three-colored: red, white, and blue living entities. Red is the representation of the mode of passion, white is the representation of the mode of goodness, and the blue is the representation of the mode of ignorance. These modes of material nature belong to the material energy, and therefore the living entities under these different modes of material nature have different kinds of material bodies. Because they are forgetful of their spiritual identities, they think the material bodies to be themselves. To the conditioned soul, me means the material body. This is called moha, or bewilderment. It is repeatedly said in the Katha Upanishad that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is never affected by the influence of material nature. It is rather the conditioned souls or minute, infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme who are affected by the influence of material nature and who appear in different bodies under the material modes. Guṇair, vicitrāḥ, sṛjatīṁ, sa-rūpāḥ, prakṛtim, prajāḥ, vilokya, mumuhe, sadyaḥ. sa-rūpāḥ jñāna-gūhayā. Divided into varieties by her threefold modes, the material nature creates the forms of the living entities, and the living entities seeing this. It's very important, seeing this. Vilokya are illusioned by the knowledge covering feature of the illusory energy. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vijnana Goswami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so I will start describing the overview, or explaining the overview of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. We explained that the 9 topics of Srimad-Bhagavatam are there to properly give us understanding of the 10th topic. And but to give us the understanding of the 10th topic, we have to describe the 9 topics also very correctly. Everyone is very much interested in these 9 topics. Everyone is asking the questions how the material nature works, how the creation took place, what's going on after creation, how the maintenance of the living entities take place, what are the structure of the universe, geography of this world, what is the proper laws which everyone should follow. Everyone is more or less interested in all these topics which are described. Tatra sarga visargascha sthanam poshanam utaya. Everyone is very much interested in the psychology. You know, why some people are more inclined to a certain way of action and other people are more inclined to very destructive way of action. What is this psychology which keeps us bound in this material world? Everyone is discussing these topics. Sthanam poshanam utaya. Manvantareshanu katha, yes, I already said that everyone is talking about the proper laws, how to live in this material world. That's also very big subject matter. And of course, Ishanu katha is not so common, but nevertheless, some people speak about avatars who are coming in this world. Nirodha. Everyone is very much interested how to stop this ultimate destruction of the material nature of this body. Everyone is very much interested how to stop this destructive or disintegrating processes, how to become young again, how not to become old. Mukti, many people are very much interested in mukti. But the point is that we may describe all these topics, but if we describe them out of the context or improperly, incorrectly, they will not reveal the 10th topic, Ashraya. And Srimad-Bhagavatam, the glory of Srimad-Bhagavatam is that it describes all these different topics in very close connection, in very direct relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or Ashraya. So that's one point which I wanted to reiterate, why Srimad-Bhagavatam is designed like this. Then another very important point to understand is that, you know, you may rightly say that why don't we start by directly approaching the description of the Supreme Shelter? Why don't we start by directly describing different beautiful qualities of the Supreme Lord? Very attractive qualities. Why should we go through all this hassle and headache by describing all these material elements, how they're being created, this and that. So it's a very important question, and we have to know very clearly the answer to this question. So the answer to this question is that, yes, there are two kinds of characteristics. Any object of this world or another world is defined by two types of characteristics. One is called sva-rūpāḥ lakṣana, and another one is called tatastha lakṣana. Sva-rūpāḥ lakṣana is the intrinsic characteristic, which is always there. So the methodology of Srimad-Bhagavatam is to wait with the description of the sva-rūpāḥ lakṣana of the Lord, and before that describe the extrinsic characteristics of the Supreme Lord. Tatastha lakṣana. Why? The answer is as follows: because the Lord is not perceivable by us. And when we hear description of His qualities, we may very easily mistake these descriptions with the material descriptions. And oftentimes people think that, Krishna was a very great human being, he was a great yogi, he created some miracles, and therefore foolish people worship him as God. So Srimad-Bhagavatam mercifully does not want us to make this very common mistake. Therefore, Srimad-Bhagavatam is describing tatastha lakṣana of the Lord, which we can perceive by describing this material nature and the condition of the living entity within the material nature in connection with the Lord. We can understand or deduce, or how you say this, intuit the qualities of the Lord. Only when we understand how this material world works in connection with the Lord, we will be able to appreciate His sva-rūpāḥ lakṣana. So therefore, I already mentioned it several times, therefore this method is there. Yes, there are secondary qualities of the Lord, tatastha lakṣana. They are not describing His innate, permanent nature, because sometimes this world is not there, but nevertheless it's important lakshanas, important significators of the Supreme Absolute Truth for us, because they are available to our knowledge and we can relate to it and we can understand how it works and we can really appreciate the beauty of the picture which Srimad-Bhagavatam gives. So that's another thing which I wanted to say. Before we get into the subject matter of the third canto. And the third thing which I wanted to say from the very beginning is that, yes, I mentioned in the last class that there are in Chatukshloki of Srimad-Bhagavatam, in the four core verses of Srimad-Bhagavatam, the four main subject matters of Srimad-Bhagavatam are described, and this is explained by Lord Krishna himself as jñāna, vijnana, rahasya, and sa-anga, together with angas, with anga. So jñāna means the knowledge of the Lord who is not perceivable. He is adoksaja. He is not available to our senses. We cannot experience the Lord in our conditioned state. But vijnana is called vijnana, or realized knowledge, is the knowledge of His energy, because we can relate or we can understand how His energy works. And in any case, we are very much interested in how His energy works. We are very much interested in all these events in this material world. Ultimately, it's all the movements of His energy. And what is more important, it is explained in the second canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam in this section, that His energy, please do listen very, very carefully, because otherwise His energy as Maya can cover your consciousness. and you will be bewildered. So please listen very carefully. It is said about the energy in the second verse of Chatuk Shloki of Srimad-Bhagavatam, Yatha baso yatha tamaha, that the energy of the Lord, Maya, works in two ways. Sometimes it reveals something. Yatha baso. Abhasa means reflection or some dim light reflected somewhere. It's more or less the revealing capacity. So one function of the energy of the Lord is to reveal to us something. Another function of the energy of the Lord is to cover. So like this material energy, it reveals us something and it covers something. Like this material energy, if we study this, it will reveal to us certain aspects. It reveals to us the material elements and sense objects which we can exploit or enjoy by interacting our senses with the sense objects. So this energy reveals material objects, and at the same time it covers. What does it cover? It covers the Lord. It covers His participation in this material world. We don't see it, we don't understand it. So yatha baso yatha tamaha, it has two functions. In the same way, the spiritual energy also reveals something and covers something. Like in Vaikuntha, the spiritual energy covers the material energy and reveals the opulence of the Lord, but at the same time it covers the sweetness of the Lord. And in Goloka Vrindavana, it covers the opulence of the Lord and reveals the sweetness of the Lord. So in any phase of creation, this is the modes, the two modes of the energy to work. Like electricity. Electricity can heat and electricity can cool down. Like now, luckily we're using electricity to cool down through the air conditioning. But this, in the winter, the same electricity will heat. So this double function of the energy we have to understand very clearly to really understand what's going on. So basically, when we're studying the material energy, we have to understand how it works, how it covers our knowledge, as explained in this particular verse, how it covers our consciousness, and how it reveals to us something which we want. Ultimately, the energy reveals to us something which we want. This Maya also has two functions, vidya and avidya. And vidya function of Maya will reveal to us the proper knowledge of the soul to a certain extent, the proper knowledge of our nature. And avidya function will cover it. So that's what I wanted to say from the very beginning, because we are starting this first subject, very important first subject of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is beautifully described specifically in the third canto. Of course, it's described in other cantos, but the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam is devoted specifically to this sarga, to the primordial creation, the creation of the elements, and also by explaining how it works. Srimad-Bhagavatam explains how by creating all these elements and all these bodies and everything, the material energy covers our knowledge and how it can reveal our knowledge. By which means, by understanding this third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, we really have to understand these two things. How the knowledge of the living entity is covered and how the knowledge of the living entity can be uncovered or enlightened or consciousness of the living entity can be enlightened by understanding this this mechanism of the creation. So again, I restate that the main topic of the third canto is sarga and visarga. These two subject matters are very much prominent in the third canto, and the specific function, as I already said, of this description. We spoke with you last time that by hearing again and again how Maya works, we can be free from the influence of Maya. That was the exact verse from the second canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, last verse from the 7th chapter of the second canto. How hearing about Maya helps us to become free from the bewilderment of Maya. So that's exactly the design of the third canto. We're hearing again and again here how the material energy of the Lord works, because we know how it works, but the third canto gives us the proper perspective of its working. And ultimately, I will now, please again listen very carefully, I will now try to encapsulate what is supposed to take place within our heart. Ultimately, if we go very thoroughly through the third canto, through the topics of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, very deeply rooted anartha, which is there within the heart of every living entity, will be uprooted. This anartha is called scientific mentality. Actually, the main purpose of the third canto of this topic of sarga and visarga is to uproot us from the scientific mentality, which has many, many varieties, and which attributes the independent action or at least partial independence to the material nature. Ultimately, what is scientific mentality or Sankhya mentality? Or actually, as I said, there are so many different varieties of this misconception. All these misconceptions are there within our heart. And we see the world around us, which is the product of this misconception. The whole modern civilization is the product of this particular misconception that the material energy can be studied independently. It has an independent nature, and it's more or less a mechanical arrangement. Why do people want to separate the energy of the Lord from the Lord? To make it exploitable. If we remember about the connection between the energy and the owner of the energy, the spirit of exploitation will be hampered. Instead, the spirit of service will be awakened within our heart. But if we forget it, if we cover it, and we all, we don't need to cover it. It's already covered within our consciousness. And the science is basically this enterprise, this beautiful, creation of the human mind. This modern science has this premise. Therefore, the scientists, they're not allowed to speak about God. Even if they believe. Some scientists do believe to a certain extent, and there may be some God. I will explain, these partial beliefs of the scientists which may be there. But they're not allowed to speak about God. It's unscientific. Scientific method, the most important scientific premise is that the nature is independent. It doesn't matter whether God exists or not. He may exist, let him exist. But the nature is independent. And the science proves it again and again and again by studying the nature, by conquering it over, by showing how this method works, by, going on with its triumph over the material nature, and by ultimately destroying everything and destroying the fine sentiments within the human soul by igniting or reinforcing this spirit of enjoyment, which is very destructive ultimately. So this scientific mentality, it's very clearly, for example, Darwin. Darwin is more or less the father, first Newton. Newton was more or less the first great scientist in our era. And both Darwin and Newton, they had the same philosophy in regard to the material nature. Darwin, to a lesser extent, Newton, to a greater extent, believed in God. But even though they believed in God, their ultimate understanding was that God has created this nature and it made a mechanical arrangement of this nature, and ultimately he has nothing to do with this nature. Yes, he created it, but from that time on, this nature is going on its own. And therefore, we can easily study this material nature without constantly referring to the involvement of God, who is not involved in this material nature. That's a very strong premise of the scientist. And be victorious and be right and understand the truth, quote unquote. So that's how it is when the main premise of the material science, which is diametrically opposed to the science described in Srimad-Bhagavatam. The third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam is describing the spiritual science. Of course, other cantos of Srimad-Bhagavatam explain other aspects of spiritual science, but this is specifically in regard to the material nature, to the working of material nature. So what is the difference? The difference is this, that according to the science, God or whatever, whoever, it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. Created this mechanical arrangement for us to exploit. That's implied understanding which is behind this. So, and this is a very handy philosophy because, it justifies our exploitation of material nature. By this philosophy, we make the energy of the Lord exploitable and go on with this exploitation or the spirit of enjoyment, which we can see, very clearly. So the spiritual science of creation, primary and secondary creation, explained in the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is diametrically opposed to this premise, and it says that God is involved in any minute act of creation. It's His energy. It's moreover, this energy is Him. It's His energy and it's Him. He is both upadana karana and nimitta karana, efficient cause or instrumental cause, nimitta karana, or material cause or upadana karana. That's, in two words, the philosophy of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. God is cause of all causes, and it means that He is the matter from which this creation is done, and He is the brain or consciousness or the desire behind this, the living entity behind this creation. So when we look at any other philosophy, we will see that they will disagree with this point. They will not agree with this. They will give different versions of causality. What is the cause? Some will say that, like Sankhya. Basically, it's the third canto refutes the Nirishvara Sankhya of Ishvara Krishna, or this classical Sankhya, so to speak. And what Sankhya means? Sankhya means pradhan is the independent cause. It's on its own. It's both efficient and upadana karana and nimitta karana. These two causes is pradhan. Pradhan means material energy. Material energy is independent of the Lord. It's independent cause. The science more or less says the same thing. Buddhism says that ultimately nothing is the cause. Everything came from nothing. Very nice philosophy. But there are Pashupatas. Pashupatas say that, Surya is the cause, or Shiva is the cause, or Ganesha is the cause. They say that they are efficient cause and everything is effect of their creation. So, the Vaisheshikas, they say that atoms is the cause. This is atomistic philosophy. Nyaya says that, God is there, but ultimately there are these principles which work independently. And if we attribute the partial or full independence to the material nature, we can exploit the material nature, and we can hope that by explore and study the material nature, we will be free from sufferings. That's the underlying idea. The scientists, why do they study this material nature? To become free from sufferings and to make everyone free from sufferings. Medicine, biology, chemistry, and physics, they all ultimately aim at liberation. Liberation means freedom from suffering. How they do this? By properly manipulating this material energy. And why the scientists are, I have a scientific background, so I'm speaking with some authority here. Why the scientists are so adored in the modern society? They are actually the pundits, they have the ultimate answers to all the questions. Come to us and we will free you from all sufferings, and ultimately we will make you deathless, immortal. You will become immortal. We will free you from all the diseases. COVID-19, no problem. Vaccine will be there. Any vaccine we will do. Anything you want, we will ultimately do. We will free you from all the sufferings by independently studying of the material nature. But what happens, and we will see it very clearly, and it's becoming more and more clear, that this approach is ultimately counterproductive. It doesn't work because they don't take into consideration the reality. Their initial premise, which they don't even bother to prove, because they know they cannot prove it. They cannot prove that there is no God. Nobody can prove there is no God. But they say, why should we bother about it? We don't need it. Whether he is there or not, he has nothing to do with this world. That's the initial premise, which is incorrect. And the philosophy or the science, actually science, which is described in the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is totally opposite. The Lord is involved in this creation at every step, and nothing will happen in this creation unless the Lord's will is there. So, as I said, Srimad-Bhagavatam is the explanation or the natural commentary to Vedanta Sutra, and we will, if we take Vedanta Sutra, then the second pada, the second chapter of Vedanta Sutra, already refutes all these different philosophies about the causation, about this particular point. And another topic, very important topic of Srimad-Bhagavatam, of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is the nature of time. Because the time is, the eternal time is the form in which the Lord enters this material nature and influences this material nature and ultimately rules this material nature. And nobody knows what is the time. And nobody will ever know what is the time unless they understand that this is the glance of the Lord who glances over material nature and starts all the processes within the material nature. And it's time who is ultimately directing this material nature. It's very interesting to know, speaking about the psychology of the conditioned living entity, is that, and that's why no matter how many proofs good astrologers will provide that astrology works, astrology will never be accepted by the science as the real science. Because astrology, or the spiritual science of time, how the Lord works through all these influences, it will always be rejected without any scientific proof. You know, the astrologers can make very solid case. They can look at the chart and they can see, you know, how it works, but it will never be accepted by the science because they don't want ultimately to accept that there is a supreme ruler in this world in the form of time. So regarding this human psychology, which actually rejects, doesn't want to, you know, because if the time is there, if God is there in the form of time, who ends everything, who rules everything, who is everything, if everything is predestined, or to a certain extent is predestined, then, you know, you cannot really enjoy. Your whole life is spoiled. You cannot do anything. You can't enjoy. You know, your spirit of enjoyment, it's totally hampered and watered down. You know, it's not possible. So I wanted to tell you a little story, little anecdote from the Roman history. There was this great emperor, Caesar Tiberius. And Tiberius, he was a dictator, as all of them. And what it means to be a dictator, it means to manifest to the greatest extent, you know, your lording over propensities. I'm the enjoyer. I'm the only enjoyer. And therefore they, you know, they exploit, they kill others, they do whatever, you know, when the poor conditioned living entity gets this opportunity to manifest his spirit of enjoyment to the fullest extent, he does crazy things, and he was a demon. You know, these demonic tendencies he manifested to the fullest extent. But he specifically hated astrologers. He really hated because, but at the same time, he was very much enamored by the astrologers. It's like this, you know, within the psychology of enjoyer, in this material world, there is always a fear. What if I'm not right? What if there is God? What if I will have to suffer because of my misdeeds? So he would always invite astrologers, any astrologer who would be, prominent, he would invite him to his palace. He would ask him about the destiny and speak about this, and ultimately he would kill him. So he would feed him a good feast and then kill him. Because he was hating, there's this very idea that astrologers can be right was repulsive to him. And then, what he would do after the feast, after the encounter with him, interview with him, the astrologer will be taken out, and while he was taken out, he was living in an island, in a Capri, he would be pushed to the sea from the mountain. So he made one exception to one astrologer. He didn't kill one astrologer because he asked this astrologer before giving farewell to this astrologer. He asked him, can you look in your own chart and see what is there in your fate in the closest future? And this astrologer made prashna, whatever it is, and his eyes became big and round, and he said, "Oh, I'm in a very precarious condition. Some imminent danger is there. I may die very soon." And Tiberius, to make the astrology wrong, didn't kill him. Because he didn't want to confirm his prediction. So what I want to say is that this is a very important point of the whole, this whole canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, that the Lord is involved in the form of time. And there are many descriptions in this third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam how the evolution takes place. I will try to explain, if I have time, the evolution of the matter which is described here in the third canto, but it is said that, according to Sankhya, and that's a very important premise of Sankhya, there's Satkaryavada theory, which we partially agree with, that the effect is there in the cause. But anyway, but they say that the process of evolution, which we can see in this material world, is natural. The same way as Darwin says, the process of evolution, this is a natural selection. He says natural selection. Nobody is involved. It's a natural process. So the same way Sankhya says that the primordial elements which are there naturally evolve one from another. From Mahatattva, Ahankara naturally evolves. From Ahankara, in goodness, anyway, I will explain this. All the demigods evolve from, they don't speak about demigods. The mind evolves from Ahankara in passion. The senses are evolved. And from Ahankara in ignorance, the Mahatbhutas, Pancha Mahatbhutas evolved, and the sense objects, Pancha Tanmatras. But they say it's a natural process of evolution because of the presence of Jiva. They say that Jiva disturbs the equilibrium of Prakriti, and Prakriti naturally evolves. But Jiva has nothing to do with this process of evolution. But when we see the description of the same evolution in Srimad-Bhagavatam, it is said that in every stage of the evolution, on this primordial stage, when the elements are created, the creation takes place only when the Lord's will or Lord's energy enters into this element, and because of the involvement of the conscious energy of the Lord in the form of time, the next stage of creation takes place. So that's why the time and the evolution of the energy or material energy, sarga and visarga, the secondary creation, is so elaborately described in this canto. So basically, that's the essence, because otherwise we will be worshipping the material nature, we will be worshipping scientists. Scientists, as I say, they are priests. They are priests of the modern world. I can tell a little anecdote from my own life. My father was an atheist, and he was a scientist. And he wanted me to be an atheist and a scientist. And when I, all of a sudden, by some good luck, became a devotee, he was very disturbed. And once we had some argument with him, and he was saying that, you know, what your religion will give to you? What did it give to the humanity over the thousands of years? It didn't give anything, but scientists. And he took the pen, this, how you call this pen? This шариковая ручка? Ball pen. Yeah. He took the ball pen and he said, the scientists, they created this ball pen, and I will worship them because they did this. So, I mean, that was his way to illustrate that why should we worship scientists? Because they do everything which we need. So this mentality is very prevalent. It's very deeply rooted. It's in everyone. And we all think that, you know, science ultimately will make me happy, will free me from diseases, and will, you know, because of the science, they can interchange my heart to another heart, my stomach to another stomach, my head to another head, and I will remain happy living in this world with all these spare parts taken from other bodies. And ultimately, you know, I will freeze my body, and then they will resurrect me or somehow or other revive me from my slumber, and so on and so forth. So this mentality is very deep, and the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam is defeating this mentality directly by describing the process of creation, and indirectly by different stories. So I will just give an example how Srimad-Bhagavatam works, because we already heard this, that Srimad-Bhagavatam describes ultimately the shelter, the ashraya, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, directly and indirectly. Directly through different prayers and through different descriptions which are there, and indirectly. So I will explain how the stories of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam defeat or depict this mentality, and ultimately show the bad consequences of this mentality in an indirect way. The third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam actually starts from, in the second canto it is said that Maitreya Rishi and Vidura and Uddhava, they met with each other, and Maharaja Parikshit asked, please explain to me about Vidura and Uddhava. So the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam starts from this meeting between Uddhava and Vidura. Vidura was doing pilgrimage. He left Hastinapur being totally frustrated with Dhritarashtra. He was really pained in the heart. And he started wondering, he didn't want to see this war, because he knew that this exploitive spirit which is there in the heart of Dhritarashtra, in the heart of Duryodhana, will ultimately bring about the destruction of the whole dynasty. And he didn't want to be the eyewitness of this gruesome event. So he went on pilgrimage and ultimately he came here to Vrindavan. Still in Vrindavan, there is a place which is called Jñāna-gūhayā. It's a beautiful place near Yamuna river, near the bank of Yamuna, Jñāna-gūhayā. This is the meeting place between Vidura and Uddhava. This is where Vidura and Uddhava exchanged the news. Vidura, who was absent for a long time and didn't know what happened, didn't know about the results of the war, and didn't even know what happened after the war. He started asking different questions of Uddhava, and Uddhava ultimately had to tell him that the Supreme Personality of God had left this world, that the whole Yadu dynasty was destroyed, and the Kaurava dynasty was destroyed. So that's more or less the subject matter of first 3 chapters of the 3rd canto. And beautiful description of Vrindavan is there. It's like, it's very interesting, this introduction to the 3rd canto. After that, there is so much dry topics. Not really dry, but still, relatively speaking. But to give us little solace from the very beginning, Shukadev Goswami is describing beautiful pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan. And the meaning is that, the implied meaning is that ultimately this whole scene of material creation, the sarga, which is the main topic of 3rd canto, is only for Krishna to come and to perform his beautiful leelas. So even before describing how the stage is created, Uddhava describes the beautiful pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan and outside of Vrindavan. It's a long, beautiful description. And Vidura asked him, can you please tell me the philosophy which the Lord explained to you before his departure? It must be very important. He must have said to you something very important because, and actually Vidura is very much touched because Uddhava kind of hints to him that the Lord, while living from this world, he was remembering him. And Vidura, his heart melts when he hears this. He thinks, it's amazing. The Lord thought about me at the time of departure and spoke about me. And Vidura asked, can you please explain to me what is this philosophy which he told you before leaving this world? And Uddhava humbly says, no, I cannot tell you because there was somebody else who was present there. He is much more senior than me. It's Maitreya Muni, please. He is close by. Please find him and he will explain to you everything. And I will proceed to Badarikashram according to the order of the Supreme Lord. And Vidura goes on to Haridwar, and in Haridwar he meets Maitreya Muni, and he asks a very interesting question. The very first question from which the whole description of the 3rd canto is evolves or unfolds. The question of Vidura, who is a great devotee of the Lord, who has traveled all over the place, who has seen everything, who is very wise. His first question to Maitreya, he doesn't want him to ask the sensitive questions about the Lord and everything. He asked the first question, please tell me why everyone is suffering in this world. Why, even though everyone is trying to become happy, everyone without an exception, nobody gets happiness, but that may be not so bad. Everyone is trying hard to become happy. Nobody becomes happy. Okay, fine. But on the contrary, everyone becomes miserable. So he asked this question, and ultimately the answer to this question, the 3rd canto is the answer to this question, because if we understand how the living entity gets entangled in this creation. And that's exactly what is described in the verse which we read. Then we will be free from these sufferings. We will be able to disentangle ourselves, to free from this. We will become mumuhe, amumuha. We will not become muda. We will become free from this bewilderment of Maya. So that's the question from which the third canto starts, and immediately there, Maitreya Muni starts describing the creation Sankhya philosophy, the theistic Sankhya philosophy, the theistic science of this creation from the point of view of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and it is being repeated 3 or 4 times. Partially, sometimes completely. Last time in the teachings of Lord Kapila, in a very elaborate way in the chapter from which we read. So, but I wanted to tell about the stories, how the stories of the third canto describe this. One interesting story which describes this, which is right there in the, I believe, in the 5th chapter of the third canto. No, in the 6th, in the 6th chapter. I don't exactly remember in which chapter. That's the story about Lord Brahma. His appearance on the lotus flower. It's very interesting because this story more or less depicts, no, actually it's in the 8th chapter, yeah, that's before the 9th chapter, in the 8th chapter of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. When the Lord Brahma appeared, he couldn't understand on the lotus flower in this dark universe, which was not really manifested yet. It is said in Srimad-Bhagavatam here, Lord Brahma in his ignorance contemplated, who am I that am situated on the top of this lotus? Wherefrom has it sprouted? There must be something downwards, and that from which this lotus has grown must be within the water. And so what Lord Brahma did, we all know, he dove deep into this water of Garbhodaka ocean. And for many, many years, he was a good diver. He was the original diver. He spent diving and trying to track down the source, his own source. So this is the scientific mentality. By this story, the scientific mentality is very beautifully, or experiential mentality, empiric mentality is very beautifully depicted, because we all born in ignorance. Omagyanatimirandasya. We are born in this darkness of ignorance. So what we do? We study science. We take MA, BA, PhD, and we try to experiment with the source. So, but what is explained in the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, yes, Lord Brahma did it, but he was unsuccessful. And he had 4 heads. It specifically said there that he was looking in all directions. He could look in all directions. So he was much more brainy than any other scientist. He was much more brainy than Einstein or Newton or whoever was there. He had 4 heads. Didn't work. And he was really diving deep. Diving deep means very deep investigation of the laws of material nature. But the more he was diving, the more he was bewildered. And that's exactly what we have as a result of all this, glorious enterprise of living entities. The more we are diving and the more we are being bewildered. And therefore, he came back, he sat down, and he concentrated his mind, he put his mind into concentration. He understood that the way to obtain the real knowledge is not through the senses, which are ignorant, and this process can only fructify in ignorance, can only increase our ignorance, and that's what it is. The interaction of the senses with the sense objects only increases ignorance. There is nothing else. That's what it is. When the senses are interacting with the sense objects, the ignorance, avidya, becoming thicker and thicker and thicker within our heart. And we're becoming more and more bewildered. So this story depicts this, and Lord Brahma, he starts contemplating. He became, introversial. He heard this tapa, and he started meditating on tapa, on his source. He didn't know what is his source. He didn't know who is the Lord. But the Lord revealed himself to him due to his endeavors, due to his attempts to be concentrated inside. So the proper way to understand the reality is not from inside outside, it's vice versa. It's from outside inside. It's within the heart when we will be able to understand this. And still, and then the story goes on, and the Lord Brahma still bewildered, even though he saw the Lord and he asked the Lord how to perform his task. And 9th chapter describes his prayers and how the Lord explains to him. So more or less the secondary creation is depicted in this story as totally dependent on the Lord. The secondary creator couldn't do anything. He couldn't mix all these elements together without the help of the Lord. But even more important story, in the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, there's very few stories. There's not many stories. It's mostly philosophy, mostly Sankhya. But there is this story of Varaha and Hiranyaksha. And in the contrapunct, in the contraposition to this story, there is a story of Kardama Muni and Devahuti and Kapila Muni. So these two stories, they are very much interrelated with each other. In the story of Hiranyaksha and Varahadev's appearance, and before that, the story of Kumaras who traveled to Vaikuntha is described. It's a very instructive story because this is a story about offense. Actually, from now on, starting from the third canto, every other canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam will describe some story of offense, some story of fall down of the living entity with offensive mentality, and how his mentality becomes degraded due to the power of offense committed by him. And especially the fourth canto. When we, probably next time when we come to the fourth canto, I will explain. There are so many offenses in the fourth canto to teach us to avoid offenses. But in the third canto, there is and in every other story, in every other canto, there is a story of offenses. In the third canto, the offense is there, and this offensive mentality is exactly this. This offensive mentality is the attempt to understand the Lord by one's own endeavors, to understand the truth by one's own endeavors, to declare that I can independently understand either material nature or the truth of course, they're not interested in knowing the Lord. But even four Kumaras, they committed an offense. Ultimately, they committed offense. They offended by cursing Jaya and Vijay. They committed an offense. And what was their offense, or what was their mistake? The same experiential mentality. They wanted to know the Lord by their own endeavors. And of course, Hiranyaksha is a very bright example of this mentality. Hiranyaksha is the result of offense. Offense of deity towards Kardama, towards Lord Shiva. Deity, in her spirit of enjoyment, couldn't control her senses, and therefore she more or less seduced her husband, Kashyapa Muni, sorry, not Kardama, Kashyapa Muni. And as a result of the spirit of enjoyment, what happened, Hiranyaksha appeared. And that's a very interesting name, because Hiranyaksha means golden eyes. Why Kashyapa Muni gave his son such a name? Because his eyes only see gold. Hiranyaksha is the metaphor or the symbol of the greed. The primordial quality which is there in everyone's heart, greed for enjoyment. He is the Adi Daitya. And this demonic quality, which is original demonic quality, is this greed for sensual enjoyment. And he was Hiranyaksha. He had this, gold in his eyes. He could only see gold. And therefore what he did, because of him, it is said that the earth was deeply down in the mud. And that's basically, again, the description of the mentality, scientific mentality, so to speak, scientific mentality. Because what scientists do, they exploit the material nature. As a result, the status of Earth becoming lower and lower and lower. We can see that there is a degradation of consciousness. Even though the scientists, they proudly proclaim that there is a progress, but ultimately there is no progress. There is a very rapid degradation. In every country where the science has become the ultimate religion, and the scientists have become the ultimate priests of the religion, and the Nobel Prize laureates became the, Mahajans of this religion. So we see the degradation, moral degradation, the degradation of consciousness, the complete, shrinking down the consciousness of living entities, of human beings who live there. So, and it's actually very interesting, because Hiranyaksha is described in Srimad-Bhagavatam in the 7th canto that he had golden, not only golden eyes, but he also had golden hairs. So it's very clear hint on the Europeans, because there is no people with golden hairs here in India. They only have black hairs. But Hiranyaksha, the original demon, he had golden hairs. And because of him, the earth was down, and he was ultimately he was laughing and mocking at the Supreme Lord when the Supreme Lord came in this form of Varaka and said, "You are an amphibious creature who is always in these waters, looking for something, sniffing for something in the waters." Anyway, I'm not going to describe this beautiful story. You should read Srimad-Bhagavatam. But actually the lesson of this story, again, it is very clearly said, who is Varaha? Varaha is the manifestation of sacrifice, of the Vedic science. There is a Vedic science to make you prosperous. This is the science of sacrifice. And Varaha is the manifestation of this. Who is Hiranyaksha who is fighting with him? He is the manifestation of the mentality that I can exploit the material nature. I don't need to do sacrifice to the Supreme Lord. I can exploit independently the material nature, and therefore, which causes the degradation. And ultimately, the Supreme Lord kills Hiranyaksha. So, by these stories, Srimad-Bhagavatam teaches us that this is not correct approach. By the story of Lord Brahma, he teaches us that we should be contemplative and should look inside and try to please the Lord inside. By the story of Lord Varaha and Hiranyaksha, he teaches us that if we want prosperity, then prosperity is based on sacrifice. In Sankirtana Yagya, you should perform Yagya, Sankirtana Yagya or some other prescribed Yagyas. You should serve other people. You should feed people. And this is the way to be prosperous. There is no need to be afraid that the earth will not be able to feed so many living entities. The earth will be able to feed so many living entities. Krishna is not a poor man. He can feed everyone if you understand the method. And what is the method? The method is sacrifice, the Vedic science, as opposed to the materialistic science or atheistic science, which denies the presence of God. And therefore, the story of Kardama Muni and Devahuti is, as I said, in contrapunct, or I don't know how it is, there is this musical term that in a contrast to this story, because Devahuti was trying to serve Kardama Muni. Deity wanted to enjoy by Kardama Muni. And as a result of this enjoying spirit, Hiranyaksha appeared. Devahuti wanted to serve, and she was serving for many, many years. And ultimately, Kardama Muni gave her all enjoyments. He gave her this beautiful castle, which could fly in the sky. He was satisfying her senses. He made her young and healthy. He did everything. And as a result, Kapila Muni was born. So this is a very important teachings of the third canto. You want to be prosperous, no problem. There is a Vedic science how to be prosperous. Don't try to be prosperous illegally by the scientific, so-called scientific methods. Try to learn the science of service, science of sacrifice. And in this way, you will be able to get or to fulfill your material desires, but at the same time, you will get liberated. Whereas if you do it in the opposite way, you will be degraded. This is how this idea is being explained by the stories of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Few stories of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. And ultimately, I'll probably, let me very quickly explain the creation, the evolution which is there. In a very quick way, I'm sure you know this Sankhya, but there are essential points of the Sankhya philosophy which we have to remember all the time. Because ultimately Sankhya philosophy, Bhagavatam Sankhya philosophy, explains the workings of our mind. Very importantly, explains the workings of our mind. And by explaining this, it explains how material energy covers our mind or our consciousness, or how it can uncover it and reveal the truth. Again, as I said, this is two functions of any energy of the Lord, including the material energy. So the covering of material energy is explained, the whole, we know the whole scheme of Sankhya. Oh, so I'm talking too long. No, I can say a few words.
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay, so yes, I will explain few important things to finish this whole overview of the third canto. So we know that there is this pradhan. Pradhan is another word of pradhan is avyakta. It's unmanifest, balanced state of material energy. And then the Lord looks at this material energy, and material energy becomes manifest, and from pradhan it becomes prakriti. But prakriti is still in a balanced state. All the gunas are balanced. It manifests. It's a very important point. As I said, that the living entity become bewildered when they look, vilokya. Vilokya means they looked at the material energy, and by looking in the material energy, they become bewildered. The Lord also looks in the material energy. He doesn't become bewildered. Srila Prabhupada explains this in the purport, that's his lila. But by looking at something, we express our desire. The Upanishads say how the creation takes place. So kamayata. He desired. First, the Lord wanted to activate the material energy. It is also explained in the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, in the 5th chapter, where Maitreya explains this to Vidura, that the Lord wanted to accept material energy, wanted to unite with material energy. So he looked at the material energy. That's a very important point for us also. We have to understand that our desire manifests first through the eyes. Where do I look? I should look inside. I should look for the Lord inside myself. If I too much look in the material world, then I will be bewildered, because by looking at this vicitrāḥ, guṇair, creations of this variegated gunas, I become mumuhe. I become bewildered by all these beautiful creations. So that's very important. Through desire, the desire forces us to look in a certain direction. And when the Lord looked in the direction of pradhan, pradhan manifested, became prakriti. And when the Lord's glance in the form of Shambhu, and this is not explained in the third canto, but it's explained, that's Sadashiva, original Shambhu, Krishna's glance. It's explained in Brahma Samhita, united with the material energy, because the Lord himself is never in touch with the material energy. It's not for him. He is not touching. That's for us, for the conditioned living entities, to be in touch. So, and then when this primordial sexual intercourse took place between Shambhu and Prakriti, Shakti, Kali, as it is explained somewhere here in the third canto. When the Shambhu, who is the glance of the Lord, who is Kala Purush, the energy of time, is united with the material energy. Through this union, the seeds of the conditioned jivas with their suspended karmas, they were suspended in the previous act of pralaya, of destruction, are being impregnated in the material nature. And Krishna explains this in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when he says that I am the seed-giving father. He means this particular process of the impregnation of the material nature. And so what is very important to understand, that when the gunas of material nature who were in complete balance are agitated by the time. Time is called in the third canto as kshobaka. Kshobaka means agitator. He throws it out of balance. Then the gunas start evolving through the energy of time. As I already explained, that every act of evolution, including the so-called natural selection or whatever, is governed by the time, by the energy of the Lord, but it's invisible. The Lord is not visible. The time, you cannot see the time. Nobody has seen the time. Nobody knows what it is. Everyone knows that the time is there, but nobody knows what is the time. But that's the will of the Lord acting in this material world, in every act of evolution. So the very important point to understand is that the gunas of material nature were completely merged together in this primordial state of prakriti, but then they started differentiating. And ultimately, it means that in any stage of material evolution, all the three gunas are present. There is no pure sattva in this material world. There is no pure sattva. There is no pure rajas. There is no pure tamas. All the gunas are mixed together because that's how gunas works. They're always together. So there may be sattva pradhan, the predominant sattva, or rajas pradhan, or tama pradhan, certain states where they are predominant, but nevertheless they're always there. And from prakriti, mahatattva appeared. And this mahatattva is the original state of consciousness. In our mind, it is chitta. And it's very interesting that mahatattva, this is the element in the mode of goodness where the sattva guna is predominant. Therefore, it is described in this 26th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam as svachha, very translucent, and shanta, very peaceful, and adhikari, it's not undergoing any transformation. It's basically what it means is that deep down within our heart, beyond our ahankar, very important point, there is the ability to understand the reality through this element of mahatattva chitta. And that's vidya portion of Maya. If we somehow or other reach this level of consciousness, which is translucent, which is very peaceful, and which is undisturbed by rajas, which is predominantly sattvic, we will understand the nature of our soul. But for that, we have to go beyond ahankar, because ahankar is the next stage of creation. So from pradhan, prakriti, from prakriti through the glance of the Lord, from prakriti, mahatattva, by the glance of the Lord. In any stage, the glance of the Lord is there. So this mahatattva, it's basically the stage where people who are meditating, they're reaching it. They're not really reaching the transcendental stage. All this bright light or whatever, in most cases, of course I'm not in the position to judge, but in most cases it is when the yogi or meditator is really serious, he reaches the stage behind ego, beyond ego, where he can understand reality and he becomes very peaceful. He has very clear vision of reality and he is not disturbed. He is not agitated. His mind is completely peaceful. So that's mahatattva. And then ego, the black black shadow or black cloud covers over this Mahatattva. Because this is how it works. If the predominance of sattva is there, then the pendulum will go in opposite direction. And the predominance of sattva in the material nature will give rise to predominance of tamas. So from this sattvic element which is there in our consciousness, our chitta, which we are supposed to purify by chanting the holy name, Cetodarpanamarshanam. When Lord Chaitanya says in Shikshashtakam that that's the main purpose, he says, yes, first of all, you have to reach to this stage of consciousness beyond ego, Cetodarpanamarjanam. And then Cetodarpanamarjanam, chitta becomes translucent, but ego he muddles this state of consciousness of our chitta, ahankar, because ahankar is tamasic. So everything else which goes from there is tamasic by nature. Some people say that mind is sattvic. Mind is tamasic predominantly, but little sattvic. Relatively speaking, sattvic. Mind is tamasic. Senses are tamasic. Objects of the senses are tamasic. Everything is tamasic because everything is coming from ego. Of course, when ego is predominantly influenced by sattva gun, vaikārika ahankar. Vaikārika ahankar gives this mind and the demigods. The demigods which are rulers, 10 demigods which are ruler of our senses, which actually provides us the sensory capacity to see, to hear. It's all done through these primordial demigods who are the elements, and they're praying there. They're not independent. They're praying to the Lord to be able to perform their functions. They're dependent on the Lord. It's all ultimately Lord. It's His energies, His stuff. But Sankhya just describes the transformation under the influence of the Lord. So, from Sattvika Ahankar, the demigods and the mind come. And what is mind? Mind is this so-called objective consciousness which we may have. It's still not objective because it's after Ahankar. It's very subjective, but we can see the world around us. We look at it. Srila Prabhupada says that the functions of the mind is thinking. So it's a philosophical sort of thinking, feeling, and feeling. So we feel something. It's originally it's peaceful. And it's originally happy because Sattva Gun is in charge of happiness. Sattva Gun gives happiness. So, when the little children, they don't have too much, they only have mind. They don't have developed other faculties. So they're happy. They're more or less happy. They kind of see the world in a very funny way. So that's mind, this philosophizing ability in our consciousness. And then from Taijasa Ahankara, from Rajasic Ahankara, predominantly Rajasic false ego, the 10 senses come about, the Gyanendriya and Karmendriya and Buddhi come about. And this Buddhi, Sankhya doesn't have this element Buddhi. It's interesting. The original Sankhya philosophy. This Buddhi element is a specific feature of Bhagavata Sankhya. Sankhya from Srimad-Bhagavatam. And this Buddhi, what is this Buddhi? The Buddhi is the judging or the ability to perceive the world and to understand the world. to create the structure, to create, when we say that somebody is very intelligent, it basically means that he has very developed this rajasic buddhi. It means that he sees the structures, he sees this is lower, this is higher, this is how they are connected. He sees this internal connection and everything. So it's basically the perception, the ability to perceive, which is perfected in human beings. The ability to discriminate, which is perfected in human beings, as opposed to other living entities. Other living entities also discriminate. Little worm or ant crawling in the land discriminates. This is good, this is sugar, this is bad, this is some, stool or whatever, or, he has some discrimination. He has some power to discriminate. The senses perceive something and the buddhi discriminates. This is good, this is bad, this is how it is connected, this is what we should do. The buddhi is this learning ability in human beings and also in animals as well. So that's buddhi. This is rajas. Learn how to maximize our enjoyment in this material world. This is what buddhi is all about. And by interacting with the senses, and then tamasa ahankar creates first tanmatras, the objects of the senses, the subtle objects of the senses. And it's important to understand that the senses which are created by rajasika ahankar are not these gross senses. It's not the eyes. Eyes is just a lump of matter. Eyes is just seed of the original sense. So the tanmatras, something which the senses are measuring, the objects of the senses are created and the elements are created agitated by the energy of time. And ultimately, everything is there because of the will of the Lord. So this is how evolution takes place, and the whole creation is bewildering and covering us, because by looking at this material creation, what we do, we're interacting with this material creation by our senses, and by interacting by our rajasic, passionate senses with tamasic objects, we make the covering of ignorance more and more, as explained here. This is how jñāna-gūhayā takes place, how our jnana becomes covered, just because of this process of interaction. Therefore, any spiritual practice implies some restriction in this interaction. And any spiritual practice implies certain regulation, because regulation is sattvic. What is sattva? Sattva is a certain... Sattva is a dynamic stability. Sattva is stable, but it's dynamically stable. It's rhythmic. Sattvic consciousness is moving, but it's moving in a very harmonious and rhythmic way, and therefore it's stable. Rajas is totally unstable, it's chaotic, and tamas is stable in a different way, in a very tamasic way. It's in a very stable and a very static way, so to speak. It's inertia. So any spiritual discipline, now I'm explaining how the material energy, if I understand how it works, how it covers the consciousness and how it can uncover the consciousness. By chaotically interacting with this material energy, by passionately interacting with this material energy in the spirit of enjoyment, by this understanding that my interaction with the material energy is the process of knowledge. This is how I'm knowing it. This is how I'm increasing knowledge. One becomes more and more ignorant, more and more tamasic. One becomes more and more ahankarik. This in the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, it is explained how Lord Brahma first created 5 coverings of ignorance: Tamishra, Andatamishra, Moha, Mahamoha, Tamas, Moha, and Mahamoha. And they're all, creations of this ignorance. So through this chaotic process of interaction with the material energy, in the spirit of enjoyment, in the spirit of exploitation, one becomes more and more entangled and less capable of understanding the reality. More and more bewildered by the vicitrāḥ guṇair, the creation, sṛjatīṁ, all these variegated creations of this material world. And one is being punished by Rajaguna, which creates a lot of suffering to the living entity, and by Tamaguna, putting it in unconscious state. So this is what we have to understand. But if we understand that the material energy has another feature, which is Vidya Shakti, and this Vidya Shakti is predominantly sattvic. And if we try to go beyond ahankar, the false ego, beyond this bewilderment that I am this body and I have to enjoy this world, if we try to regulate our life in a very harmonious way, what is time? When we see the time, we see time is cyclic. It means rhythmic. Originally, the time is rhythmic. So what is spiritual practice? How do we uncover our covered consciousness? By coming close to this sattva gun, by trying to come in harmony or in contact in the same rhythm with the material energy. We wake when the sun is up, or ideally 1.5 hours before the sun is up. We go to bed when the sun is down. We don't dance during the night. We don't sleep during the day, which only increases the ignorance of the living entity and covers up. We're more or less, we go according to the seasons. Like right now, there is a rainy season, so those who are in India, they should follow the limitations or restrictions, dietary restrictions. More or less, we come to this harmonious union with this nature. We try to bring our consciousness into the harmony with this. That will increase sattva, and that will help us to go beyond ego, because we will never be able to understand that I'm not this body if we live chaotic life, chaotic rajasic life, even if we, mumble something or some mantra or whatever. But if we try to rhythmically live in a very regulated life, eating at the same time, sleeping at the same time, and regulating our life according to the time, to the will of the Lord, manifested as the time, respecting the will of the Lord. In Friday there is certain influence, in Saturday certain influence, the Sunday certain influence, and if we do this, we come beyond ahankar. We get to our chitta, which is the reflection of Mahatatma, which is the microcosmic element of Mahatattva. And Mahatattva, as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains, and Srila Prabhupada explains, in fact, in this 26th chapter, is capable of give us some reflection of the Lord. Not only we will be able to perceive our own soul, but we will also see reflection of the Lord. And ideally, if we study Srimad-Bhagavatam, this purification will take place, will go beyond our ahankar, and we will be able to reach this state of peacefulness, non-agitation, beyond tamas and rajas, beyond tamasic ahankar, which is like mud, the original mahatattva or chitta is like clear water. So we will be able to reach this stage of clear mind, beyond all the sufferings, and will be able to get the reflection of the Lord and understand our relationship with the Lord. So that's the message of the third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Either we make through our philosophy, philosophy of nature, the nature exploitable and try to exploit it beyond the limit and suffer as a result and destroy our consciousness and make it more tamasic and bring it down to the level of the animals, or we elevate our consciousness through the cultivating this vidya element of Maya and understanding that God is beyond, that He is connected and He is regulating the movements of Maya at every moment of time through the energy of time. That's it, and I'm really too long.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Maharaj. So we actually have some questions too. It was indeed a wonderful session, and so we will ask a few questions. There are 2 or 3 very compelling questions, Maharaj. The last part that you explained, there's a request from a devotee that if the same could be presented, if it is if there is some kind of a PowerPoint or where they can get a snapshot of what you explained the last bit particularly. So that's just one comment. And the other is also a request on the 10th subject of Srimad-Bhagavatam. This is a question from Raj Kishore from Iran, whether there is some material that we could possibly go through to study that, particularly in the focus manner.
The 10 subject matters of Srimad-Bhagavatam are described by Srila Jiva Goswami in Tattva Sandarbha. At the end of Tattva Sandarbha, there are 2 lists of 10 subject matters. One list from the 2nd canto, which I explained. The other list is from the 12th canto, where Sutta Goswami explains the 10 subject matters. They are on a superficial level somewhat different, but ultimately these are the same questions. So Srila Jiva Goswami deals with this subject matter quite elaborately at the end of Tattva Sandarbha, and Gopi Parandana Prabhu wrote very beautiful comments, so you can consult his work on Tattva Sandarbha in this regard.
Thank you, Maharaj. So, the 2 questions we will take. One comes from Anupama Radharani Pandiji. The question is, for the events to be predestined to a certain mix of souls in Sattva, Raja and Tamogunas inhabit this planet, how are those in these 3 gunas moved to action? What part does free will of the living entity play if everything is predestined? So the core of the question is, what part does free will of the living entity play if everything is predestined?
Not everything is predestined. Yes, when we are tamasic and rajasic, predominantly tamasic and rajasic, and even in sattvic way, there is a lot of predestination, but nevertheless, we can change. At the basis of everything is desire. As I said, the basis of this creation is desire of the Lord, but ultimately the Lord fulfills the desire of the living entities. So the foundation of this creation is desire, and we can change our desire. We cannot change our destiny or the events which are supposed to take place due to our previous karma, but we can change our desire, and the process of changing our desire, especially if we talk about very constructive process of changing our desire, takes place when we meet with the devotees. Because when we meet with the devotees, their desires come to us. That's actually why Sadhu Sangha is supposed to be there, because ourselves, we never desired to be with the Lord. We're rebellious living entities, as Srila Prabhupada says, and we're quite satisfied to be in this world. We can be a pig, a hog in the mud, and be very happy. But we can change our desires through association, and when we understand through association with the devotees how it works, then we can very carefully choose how we associate with the modes of material nature. Because we know that the modes of material nature still condition us and still influence us, therefore we will be our free will in that we are choosing what we want to associate with or who we want to associate with. That we are free. We are not free in a sense that our preconditioning gives us some inclination, some proclivity to associate with certain mode. If I cultivated certain mode of nature, certain guna, tamas or rajas, or certain combination of these modes of nature in previous life, I will carry on the same tendency in this life. But if we meet with the devotees and we understand how it works, we really achieve the freedom, and we can carefully avoid contact with the lower modes of nature, associate with the higher modes of nature, and especially associate with the devotees who are transcendental to this world, who can teach us. So this is where our free will lies. Our free will lies in the freedom to choose our association.
Thank you, Maharaj. So the next question, it's a follow-up question, which is that about sacrifice. What does sacrifice mean, and why does it satisfy the Lord? You spoke about,
Because sacrifice is called setu, or the bridge between the material world and the spiritual world. Because in the material world we are egocentric, and egocentricity means that we want everything for ourselves. And sacrifice teaches us to give, teaches us to serve. What is sacrifice? Sacrifice, the yaj dhatu, yajna is derived from yaj dhatu, and yaj dhatu has three meanings in Sanskrit. It's yaj sangati, association, yaj dadati, yaj danayati, or whatever. Yaj sangati, yaj dadati, to give, and yaj, the third one is also very important, to give, to associate, forget the third meaning. Anyway, what is the process of yagya? The process of yagya is that we give something away, we donate, we serve, and we associate with elevated people during this process of yagya. We invite some brahmanas or some priests for this ceremony. And this is how our consciousness is in a natural way being elevated. And it is said, worship. The third meaning of yaj, of the root dhatu yaj, is worship. So this is the way to worship the Lord. This is a certain, always yagya is a way to worship the Lord. We put Lord in the center. We give something. Therefore, it is said that any yagya should be accompanied by feeding prasadam. Otherwise, it's tamasic yagya. We should feed other people. We should invite other people and give some prasadam, or give some dakshina. Very important. If yagi is there, you should give some dakshina. You know, I'm here in Vrindavan. Of course, now it's not there, but before the bandaras were there, when in the memory of some saint. So everyone was fed, whoever is coming, and then everyone was given some donation. You come, you eat, and you take some money. Sometimes it's a huge amount of money. 100 rupees to a person or something like this. And there are many, many hundreds of people coming to Bandaras. So these three things together, and you associate. You give, you associate with elevated people, you worship, and the Lord is pleased. The Lord is pleased when you give, because you're not in the center, you're giving. The Lord is pleased when you worship Him, because He is in the center and His proper position. And the Lord is pleased when you associate with elevated people and your consciousness becomes more clear.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, there's a very interesting question from Jay Prabhu. It says, Hare Krishna Maharaj. Today's lecture was a very highly scientific, in a positive way, expressing intellectual, scientific level, giving explanation about Lord, life, etc. So the question is, as all individual souls are born with a mix of three basic modes of gunas, as the child grows and the environment in which he grows, the education he gets in his childhood plays a vital role in the kind of character he or she will have in the spiritual world. So, the spiritual education since childhood, like that, we had a Gurukul system, will result in a better world to a large extent. Will preconditioning of souls, right from childhood, will be helpful for a better world, with a question mark?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the previous samskaras, purva samskaras from the previous life, is a very powerful factor of our in our life. There is this factors which are there. So purva samskaras are one of them. So we should understand that what ISKCON is doing by the genius and amazing design and will of Srila Prabhupada, ISKCON is not only working now, but ISKCON is also creating some future. And of course, as much sattvic social interaction we will be able to produce in our communities, as much as we will be able to produce some sattvic environment for people and for children to grow, the better samskaras they will have, the better psychology they will have. So definitely there is, I mean, it's a big question how it works, but yes, and therefore samskaras are supposed to be done to produce the proper child. The Garbhadan samskar specifically is a special samskar which purifies the semen of the father and the ovum of the mother to produce the good child. And the more good progenies are there, the more good people are there, the better world is, the more sane it is. Because now it's insane, it's mad, it's crazy, and it's becoming more and more crazy.
Thank you, Maharaj. Is it a possibility for one last question?
Yes, please. There is few other questions here. I will see if it's important. Mm-hmm.
So the last question is, Maharaj, how can we get rid of manifestation of greed which leads to exploitative mentality?
Well, just read the story of Hiranyaksha. The greed will go away. Read Srimad-Bhagavatam. All these things. You know, if you read third canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, you will be protected from all these vices and problems. So there is a couple of questions. What is the best way to be a devotee and material scientist nowadays without committing offense? Could be just doing good sadhana, saying to Krishna in the nature he is studying and offering the work. Yes, I mean, Srila Prabhupada wanted us, those who are capable, to be scientists and to preach the science of Srimad-Bhagavatam and to reveal the deficiencies and the flaws of the science, of the material science. So if we maintain good sadhana and associate with devotees, especially scientifically minded devotees, now Bhaktivedanta Institute is being revived. Sadaputta Prabhu was the, and of course Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami were the founding acharyas of this institute, founding, members. But now it's being revived and there is a lot of young people who are joining. So there is a good association, people who are describing the science from Bhagavatam point of view, which is, by the way, the biological science, the evolution, the theory of evolution is there in Srimad-Bhagavatam. In a couple of places in the third canto, this evolutionary ladder, so to speak, of different entities, how it works. So there is a lot of scientific basis, and Prabhupada in one purpose to this 26th chapter, he says this verse where he speaks about ether and Shabda. He says this verse is the foundation for the very fundamental scientific exploration. So it can be done, no problem. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna uses different words for intelligence, buddhi and medha. Could you kindly explain the difference between the two? I will have to look in the dictionary more carefully what is the difference, and them particularly synonymous, but there may be some subtle difference. I don't really know. А там есть еще где? Other comments, maybe. Там наверху были еще какие-то. Up there was some little questions. Okay. If the nature of God has these two qualities, not the nature of God, it's the nature of the energy of God, of Maya, has two qualities of covering and manifesting. then who are these Nityabada? Nityabada, those people who prefer to deal with the covering part of the energy of the Lord. They don't want the revealing part of this energy. Very simple. They just want to interact with this. Where did scientists get this stubbornness in insisting on the idea of independence? It's like chopping off the branch you are sitting on. They take the stubbornness from the same source as everyone else from God Himself. God provides them with their stubbornness. Anyway, thank you very much. I guess that's it.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for yet another wonderful session. We are very, very fortunate to have your association, and we look forward to our next session 2 weeks from now. Is next Friday, the next one to that.
If it will not coincide with Janmashtami, because Janmashtami is approaching.
Oh, yeah. So 31st, 7th, no, it should not. Today is Friday the 31st, so 7th and 14th, no, it won't. It won't, but it does, Maharaj will communicate that.
Janmashtami is on the 12th, right?
11th or 12th?
12th. So 13th is Prabhupada's disappearance day, appearance day. I guess I will be too exhausted next Friday. Anyway, we will have to figure out. And by the way, I wanted to mention that today is the disappearance day of Srila Rupa Goswami. Of course, we didn't talk about Rupa Goswami's teachings, but it's a still very significant day. And ultimately, yes, we talked about Bhagavatam. It's good.
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, and thank you all for attending today's session. And we will certainly communicate to every one of you the next session in the next 2 weeks, depending upon Maharaj. Thank you again,
Okay.
Maharaj. Please accept.
Hare Krishna. Jai Vancha Kalpatarvesya Kripa Sindhubheva Cha Patitanam Pavanamya Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Bhakti Vijnana Goswami Maharaj ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki.